All right, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It is 12 p.m., so we will go ahead and get started, inshallah. My name is Sumaya Al-Hajibi. I am currently the Executive Director of the Peaceful Families Project. I just wanted to hop on and quickly thank you all for joining us and welcoming you, as well as providing you with a little bit of information about the work we do here at PFP. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Peaceful Families Project is a nonprofit organization devoted to preventing domestic violence through education. We focus on Muslim families by providing both a prevention and intervention approach to our community education and development, training and technical assistance, as well as research. At PFP, we encourage a holistic approach to addressing domestic violence through collaborating with faith and community leaders, community members, social service professionals, activists, educators, mental health providers, etc. So alhamdulillah, as such, today we are providing a free programming, and we're really blessed and honored to have two counselors with us here today, Sister Noha Alshugairi and Sister Salma Abugidieiri, with this webinar about nurturing a peaceful family. Inshallah, today we're going to focus on understanding the importance of good practice in parenting. Sister Noha will be providing us with some helpful tips, and Sister Salma will be kind of discussing some questions with her so that we can all benefit, inshallah. I'm going to just introduce our two speakers. Sister Noha Alshugairi is a licensed marriage and family therapist in practice at Newport Beach in California. She is a positive discipline lead trainer and is very passionate about fostering connections with individuals, families, and communities. Sister Salma is our director of trainings here at Peaceful Families Project. She also is on our advisory board and is one of the founding members of PFP. So alhamdulillah, we have a wealth of knowledge that they're going to be providing us today. So without further ado, inshallah, I'm going to have Sister Salma and Sister Noha kind of get us started. Please feel free to send in your questions in the chat and I will address them at the end of our webinar, inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and I'm so happy to welcome my friend and colleague, Sister Noha Alshugairi, who has contributed a really wonderful resource in the field of parenting. And many of us who have parents who have children know what a challenge it can be to really raise the kind of children that will be the good human beings, the citizens, the good Muslims that we want them to be. And so we're delighted to have you today, Noha, to be with us, to share from your experiences and from your book, Positive Parenting, and really hope that this will be beneficial for everyone, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Jazakallah khair, Salma. It's really an honor for me to be with you because I really consider you one of my mentors. So Jazakallah khair, it's such an honor to be sharing the platform with you. And inshallah, it will be a beneficial, inshallah, session for everybody. Bismillah.
Inshallah. So we'll just jump in because we have a lot to cover. What we want to make sure today is to start off with an understanding of why is it even important to focus like a whole webinar, and I know that you do entire workshops and you've written a book about parenting. How is this so important in our goal of contributing towards healthy and peaceful families in our community?
So I'm really passionate about parenting because I see it as a preventative tool. It's such a powerful and effective preventive tool. And at the same time, people actually underestimate it and don't give it enough importance that it's due. Research from early on has actually documented the correlation between good practice parenting and even mental illness. So there's actually a lot of research about that good parenting, good practice parenting, and later on we'll define what is good practice parenting. Good practice parenting have been found to actually mitigate and minimize the impact of mental illness, even with people who are predisposed to mental illness. So I have there's a YouTube video, because I'm not going to go into details of research, but I have a YouTube video on Sakina counseling where I describe one of the studies that actually correlated the relationship between good practice parenting and people who were predisposed to schizophrenia. Because we know schizophrenia has a genetic component to it. We still don't understand the full scope of how genetics play in terms of mental illness. But the research is very, very clear. It's not like ambiguous. A very strong impact of good practice parenting on mitigating and minimizing a predisposition to mental illness. So this is one. The other one is definitely good practice parenting is the strategy to any of the abuse that happens in family. And we'll talk more about this a little bit later on. Another one, it's also prevention against addictions within people. Because I'm a therapist, so I deal with a lot of also personal problems. Again, good practice parenting is the antidote to personal insecurities. Like individuals, they come into my office, some of their problems that they are dealing with as young adults is actually the result of, and I'm not blaming parents here, I'm just saying like everything starts in the home and it starts early. And with good practice parenting, we can actually minimize many, many, many problems. So for now, I think maybe that's enough for now.
Great. I mean, on the one hand, it's very hopeful, right? Because it means that we can counter even some of the genetic predispositions, that really the way that we parent our children can contribute to their overall well-being and their mental well-being, and even help them have healthier relationships in the future. On the other hand, it feels like a huge responsibility, and some people who may be listening may think, oh my gosh, is it too late? Have I already ruined my kids? You know, I remember when I first started studying counseling, my kids were already, I think, 5 and 7 years old. So the teacher was saying, you know, the personality is shaped by the age of 3. And I said, oh my gosh, I missed this. So, but what I appreciate about reading your book is really, and as we talk more, I think people will hear that these are tools that we can begin to implement at any time. It's really never too late. And some of these tools are helpful not only in parenting, but in other relationships we have. So I'm really excited that we have this opportunity to share.
I'm glad that you actually brought up this point, because such a critical point. I have parents who come sometimes attend the workshop and their kids are teenagers and they go like, oh my God, no. And they're already struggling. There is a lot of challenges during the teen years, but I wanna, emphasize your message. It's never too late. I mean, I remember I had one parent who came to me, her son was in his 50s, and they were struggling. And she's like, oh yeah, now what can I do? I said, well, there's a lot we can do. We can focus on just the relationship. Yeah. We can focus on you understanding that he's 50 years old now. You really need to let go. You really, really need to let go, even though that should have happened a long time ago. But at this point, this is something you can do. Yeah. So emphasizing your message in terms of never too late, there's always hope and there's always something to be done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. So one thing I just want to make a point of, because whenever I talk about parenting, I know that there are people with different age children who are listening. And of course, in our short time, we'll be talking in general. We'll have some very practical tools people can use, but just recognizing that those tools may need to be modified. You know, if you have a toddler versus a 15-year-old, or in your example, versus a 50-year-old, that today we won't be able to cover too much about those developmental differences, which you have actually covered in your book, and there are a lot of resources. So is there anything you want to add about that piece before we move on?
I think it's very important. Part of the good practice parenting is understanding the phase of life that the children are going through. So, for example, just as an example, let's say, part of the phase of the teen years is that teens will be moody. I mean, that's part of the phase. So if a parent is coming into that phase accepting, okay, my teenager is going to be moody, okay, then they don't go into that tension. He can't be too, how is he be, why is he moody? He shouldn't be moody. He needs to be just like I was when I was a teenager. Just that knowledge about the different characteristics of every phase actually helps with the parenting, because it's all about our expectations and what we put on ourselves in terms of what we need to do. So sometimes parents put a lot on themselves in terms of what they need to do as parenting when it's unrealistic for that particular phase. Another example that comes to my mind is the issue of with young kids, the kids under 3 years. So kids under 3 years, they're still doing the cognitive development. They really don't get it yet. They don't get cause and effect yet. But then we find some parents who actually, during that phase, they start, for example, spanking their children during that phase because they want to teach them. So for example, they want to teach them not to touch the crystal in the living room, for example. So they go spank. But the child is not ready for that. Another one is for potty training, because that's one of the challenges of that stage. So they go like, okay, I need to train him, so I'm gonna spank him every time he actually makes a mistake while we're doing the potty training. This again, he's not ready, he doesn't get it. And so knowledge about the characteristics in terms of cognitive development, emotional development, helps the parents in terms of making their expectations for their children and for themselves and what to do much more realistic and much more attainable.
Right,
and
that
more
makes
peace.
sense. And more what?
And more peace in the family.
Which is what we want. Yeah, because then it's normal.
Yes.
But I'm already anticipating the questions, which we'll come to later in terms of, well, if they're too young to be spanked, then how am I supposed to train them? But we'll come to that. First, if you could define positive parenting. What does that mean exactly?
Okay. So maybe before we go there, I'm just gonna, define the different styles, if you will, of parenting that we talk about in psychology. And these are constructs that we have created as human beings, okay? And psychologists, they have observed, they have studied different families, and they came up with these constructs. So there is this idea that parenting styles are dependent on two factors, and this came up by the research. I can't remember her name right now. In the 70s, I think 1971. So she said that the parenting styles are dependent on how much kindness is in the interaction between the child and the parent, and how much firmness is in the interaction. So relationships that are characterized with a lot of firmness and very, very little kindness, she named them authoritarian, because they're like a dictator. It's parent-centered. It's all about the parent, what they want and what she wants. And then the other style is the one where there's a lot of kindness and there's very little firmness, and that style is called permissive, and that is very child-centered. And I see a lot of what we are calling nowadays helicopter parenting as a lot of permissiveness that is disguised in terms of protection and loving. But it's really suffocating the children. It's not allowing the children to really become independent and responsible. Now, the third style is the one where we have equal amounts, not equal, but a good mix of kindness and firmness at the same time, and that she called authoritative. So positive, going back to the positive discipline now, so positive discipline is an authoritative parenting style, meaning it's a balance between kindness and firmness at the same time. It is a philosophy that is based on the Adlerian school of psychology. And Dr. Jane Nelson is the one who took the Adlerian principles and kind of put it in a format for parenting. It's a very practical, hands-on philosophy for parenting, but at the same time, it's also a mind shift in terms of how we deal with our children. So
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated, as I was reading your book, is the emphasis on, really thinking about the goals we want for our children's, ultimately, what kind of people do we want them to be, right? Rather than on the day-to-day interaction and focusing on, my crystal needs not, my crystal shouldn't be broken. But I want to teach my child how to be responsible, how to be careful, how to behave with people. So we're really cultivating a human being, a personality, and not just somebody who understands rules and has learned what to do to avoid getting in trouble and what to do to get.
Yes.
Okay, so it's kind of a bigger and deeper vision.
Very much so. So another example to your point, which is a very distinctive feature of positive parenting, this long-term emphasis on what is my long-term goal, not in the moment, and some of the young mothers nowadays, young parents are out struggling with this one because of what is called attachment parenting. Understanding that early on, when the child is an infant or a toddler, that is actually very important for the child to learn how to actually sit with their anger or frustration or irritation. And I'm not talking about abandoning them, but like parents rush, and nowadays I see them, they rush to prevent these children from feeling irritation and frustration. They fix the situation for them, but by doing that, they're actually robbing the children of their emotional resiliency muscles in order to handle life later on. So then these children grow up with, okay, adults or anyone around me needs to take care of the challenges and I don't have to do anything. And so that's a long-term lens. So like understanding that by training the children early on to sit with the regular frustrations of life, I am teaching the child how to deal with the bigger problems when they are young adults. But that's unfortunately lost in the emphasis on the moment. In the moment, I need my child to be happy. But how about long term? What does that mean long term? So thank you for raising that point.
Yeah, so we're really cultivating resilience in the child, but also, helping to instill those Islamic values of, like we want our child to be able to be responsible human beings and to fulfill, our responsibility as Muslims, and looking forward into their adult relationships to really have the tools and the skills which start from the time that they're infant, and even I would argue in utero, the way that the way that the home environment is. So when I looked through your book, I was really struggling because I wanted to choose 3 tools that we focus on today. And I want to say this to everyone because I hope that they'll read the book, that there are so many practical tools. And it really leaves you as a parent feeling very empowered that, okay, I can try this one. Okay, this one didn't work so well. Let me try this one. And until you really find maybe the handful that really work for you and your child, because every child has a different personality and they may respond differently to different things. But one of the ones that I picked, because it's core, I think, to preventing domestic violence, is the mutual respect. And I want you to talk a little bit about that and to, shed some light on even what does it mean to respect an infant? Like, how do we respect children? Children are supposed to respect their parents.
Yes. And this is one of the if I were to say what is the most common problem that comes through my office is this one, like parents who are coming in and telling me my children don't respect me, my children don't listen to me, my children don't obey me. It comes, as you said, Salma, from this cultural expectation within our Muslim community, which I'm not dismissing, but within our culture, this idea on respecting the parents, because it's in the Quran, right? In the Quran, in terms of وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, that you need to treat your parents with goodness, with ihsan. So then parents, when that's not happening, and they compare their children to themselves when they were teenagers and how they handled their parents, they go like, okay, no, something is wrong. So again, we go back to understanding the culture. For our children who are American Muslims, they will be impacted by the culture around them. There's no question about that. A culture is very important, and that's why in Islam, we emphasize the urf, which is part of the culture. So the urf that doesn't contradict Islam, that doesn't contradict the rules of Islam, is sometimes taken into Sharia as part of the ruling. Like, for example, just tangent, like mahar. Sometimes mahar is sometimes determined by urf, depending on where one lives. Anyway, coming back to the mutual respect piece. So I would like to do a role play with you, Salma. So how about this one? So can you think of I'm trying to think of an example where a child is disrespecting the parent. So like just a statement could be,
you're so unfair.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so you're gonna tell me okay, so you already said it. So I'm going to respond to you by statements that are a part of this expectation that my children needs to listen to me and they need to respect me. So I'm gonna respond by traditional statements, and then I'm gonna respond by statements that are coming from the positive discipline lens, and then we can talk about it. So and just see, Salma, how you're impacted by the two sets of statements. So the first set: don't talk to me like that. I never raised you to talk back to me like this. How dare you speak to me like this? Don't you know that Allah is going to be very angry with you because you're very disrespectful to your mom and dad? You are not going to get your phone for a whole week. How can you talk to me like this after all that I have done for you? And no child of mine speaks to me this way. So these are very common traditional responses that we actually get in response to children who are saying, for example, you're being too unfair, or you're being unfair. Yeah. So can you share with me what were the impact of this on you?
Well, to be honest, if we were not doing the webinar, I would have stormed off and left. Okay, yes. I know that I can't really leave, right? But I was also trying hard to listen to what you were saying, but I really wanted to zone out. And exactly. I was thinking to myself, that just proves it, actually. She doesn't understand me. I don't know why I bother even to talk to her. Yeah. And honestly, I even had a thought when you said something about Allah. I was like, yeah, I hate like this. She's always bringing religion into it. So yes. Really a lot of negative feelings. And even though it's a role play, I did feel like my stomach tensing up. I just felt tense, and I just wanted to leave.
Yes. So thank you, because you shared the spectrum of all these reactions that actually are happening with our children when we're responding in such a way. So let me share the other set of statements, and then we can go and talk more about it. So still I'm responding to a child saying to me, you're being too unfair, or whatever. Yeah. So I wonder what I did to upset you so much. And another one, I need to take some time to calm myself down, and then we can talk. I need a hug. So when you are able to come to me and give me a hug, come and find me. What would help us right now? To just sit quietly together, or to just maybe reconnect at another time? I can hear that you're really angry with me right now. So do you feel like telling me about it? So these are some examples of how we would respond, or we invite parents actually to respond in situations where children are being disrespectful. I mean, there could be other examples, but so how was the impact of this on you, this set?
The first one, I think, is when you were asking if I wanted to say more about it, and I wanted to say, yeah, I want to tell you about it, and I, was ready to say more. When you said something about find me when you're ready to give me a hug, I certainly wasn't ready,
Yes.
to give you a hug, because I really wanted to tell you what was upsetting me. But it actually made me kind of curious, like, oh, she wants a hug. It just made me pause, like, oh, something about what I said made her need a hug. So it just kind of made me pause. It was interesting. It kind of slowed things down on the inside.
So that's the key word here. It slowed things down for you. And how was it in your body for you?
I noticed more, I mean, I didn't notice the tension. It was more like a curious, like, this is interesting. I mean, I was already kind of worked up from the previous, right? So I was just feeling curious, like, and maybe a little bit hopeful. I wanted to talk as opposed to run away.
Yes. And so if I were to ask you between the two sets of statements, which one did you feel respected?
Oh, for sure, the second time around.
Second time.
For sure.
And this is unfortunately the piece that the parents miss. It's in terms of, like, you want your children to respect you, then how are you behaving with them? It's in our community, especially because we have this hierarchy. I'm the parent, so I'm here, and you children are down here. So it's my right to disrespect you because I'm the parent. I have the right. And you have to just give me respect. It doesn't matter how. You just have to give it to me. But the thing is, children are gonna learn how to respect you or people in their life by watching you, by how you're dealing with them. If they feel respected, if they are handled with respect, they will be able to respect you back. And this is the piece that many parents unfortunately miss. And respect happens a lot in many of our interactions. So one of them is the example we just did in terms of how do we respond to them when they are disrespectful. One of them is, for example, with teenagers specifically. A lot of parents don't understand that teenagers already have, they have their life, they have friends, they have, things in their schedules. So parents start, sometimes they actually make appointments or make arrangements without letting their teens know what's happening in the family. And then they expect the teens to just tag along. So, like, one respectful thing of handling teens is early on, you let them know what's the family doing on the weekend. You just don't come that day and say, hey, oh, by the way, we're invited to dinner tonight. That doesn't work. That's not respectful. So mutual respect, again, from a positive discipline point of view, is respecting yourself and respecting the child and respecting the situation. All three needs to be happening at the same time. Which it shouldn't be that one of them is given precedence over the other. So in authoritarian families, the respect of oneself takes precedence. In permissive parenting, the child respect is given more precedence, and then the parent forgets about himself or herself. And then in authoritative parenting, we actually have to look at all angles and do something about making sure everything is respected or everyone is respected.
So it's a much more balanced approach, and it sounds, much more faithful to the Islamic idea that we're all worthy of respect. Each, the Prophet ﷺ respected children, men, women, everyone.
Yes.
And, what I'm really hearing you say is that the modeling is really the key here. If we want our children to be respectful towards us and towards others, then it's on us as parents to model that behavior in the way we treat them.
Yes, and since you mentioned the Islamic perspective, you reminded me actually of one of the stories we share in the book, and I would like to share it with you. It's one of the stories that impacted some of my non-Muslim readers. I mean, I had some non-Muslims read, and they come back to me with that particular story. It moves them more than anything else. So I'll just share it, and some of you may know it already. So this is the story of Abdullah ibn Abbas, who was a young boy at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So we are told that Abdullah ibn Abbas was sitting to the right of the Prophet ﷺ in a majlis, in a gathering, where there were elders. And then the Prophet ﷺ was drinking, and then the cup was going to be passed around because, you know, at that time, this is what they used to do. So according to the Sunnah, the cup needs to go to the right. And the person next to the Prophet ﷺ on the right is Abdullah ibn Abbas, who's a young boy. According to tradition, we need to respect the elders in the majlis. So it's supposed to go to the eldest in the majlis, right? So what does the Prophet ﷺ do? He looks at Abdullah ibn Abbas and he asks him and he says, do you give me permission to hand the cup to the older people, the elders in the majlis? And Abdullah ibn Abbas refuses. And he says, no, O Prophet of Allah, I retain my right to drink after you. And the Prophet ﷺ, he doesn't scold him and say, hey, how dare you say that? It has to go to the, he passes the cup to Abdullah ibn Abbas. I just love this story because this to me embodies what we're talking about in terms of the mutual respect. Respecting the child as an entity. It doesn't matter how young the child is. He or she has the right to be part of the collective, part of the group, as equal as the elders in the group. And that's, to me, the embodiment of mutual respect and how the Prophet ﷺ, you know, that's what he practiced. MashaAllah, yani, alhamdulillah.
So beautiful. And although I'm so familiar with the story, I'm always moved by it because it reminds us of also the humility that we have to practice as parents and as adults. Because as a prophet, he could have just commanded the boy to pass to the elder, and the boy would not have objected. But he, even as a prophet, didn't use that authority over anyone, right? And as parents, sometimes we fall into that trap of using our authority over the child. So I really appreciate you sharing that story. It's very beautiful.
Thank you.
Are you ready to move into another tool? Yeah. So listening is the other one that I hoped we would be able to give some examples around, because I think it's something that maybe a lot of us think we do well. And just talking a little bit about what you mean in terms of, you know, a parenting tool. What does listening actually look like?
Yes. And this is one of the difficult tools for parents to do. And it's difficult for parents to do, again, because they come from a place of love, a lot of love for their children, and a lot of sense of responsibility towards their children. They believe they have to do a lot to guide and make sure that these children are not doing anything wrong. So unfortunately, in this process, then they actually miss out on listening. So we're going to do another exercise, you and I. And so I'm going to ask you, please, to share, you know, just any problem that you have. So you're pretending that you're a child and you're coming to me as your mother, and you're sharing the problem with me, and I am going to be responding to you in 3 different ways. And then we're also going to process what was the impact on these 3 different ways on you.
Okay. So, you know, all the girls in my class are going to this sleepover, and I already told you about it, and you said I can't go. And now the girls are teasing me and making fun of me because I'm the only one that never gets to go to any of these sleepovers.
I can't believe you, Salma. You're not strong enough. I told you, you need to be stronger. So what if they tease you? You should be strong and say to them, no, you guys are doing something wrong, and sleepovers are not okay, And what I don't understand. I keep telling you what to do and you're not doing it. Something's wrong with you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm restraining myself.
Tell me.
You definitely don't get it. You don't get what it's like to be a kid and to have kids making fun of you and not to be part of the group. You just don't understand.
Yes. And so you're not feeling connected to me.
No.
And you're feeling riled up against me.
Yeah, again, I just feel like storming off to my room and slamming the door. I must have done that a bit as a kid, since that's my go-to. I just want to run away.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna respond in another way right now, and so this is the next way, the next strategy. Habibti, just don't care about them. It's okay. They can tease you. It's okay. Just ignore it. It will pass, because you know what we're doing is really, really, the good thing to do. It's okay. Malish, just dismiss them. How was that for you?
I don't feel riled up, but I feel shut down. Like like it didn't feel mean that you're being mean to me, but you don't understand me.
Yeah. Okay. So far what we have done, the first one is basically criticize you for what you're doing. Second one is just give you advice that was meaningless for you. It did not do anything for you. So now we're going to do the positive discipline way of how to respond to a situation like this. So I'm going to go by and say, of course, it's very difficult for you to be teased, and it's really very difficult for you to be feeling left out. I understand. I was in situations like this before, and I know how difficult it is, especially, within your friend group. So what can we do? How can we help you? What can we do in this situation? So how was this for you?
Actually, I felt myself softening in my body, like just kind of relaxing and thinking that, oh, she understands, and curious about what your experiences were, and kind of eager to have a conversation about what your experiences were. And
right.
Yeah.
So in which scenario did you feel more connection to me?
Definitely the last one.
The last one.
Yeah,
and
because you started out by letting me know that what I was feeling, I mean, you said you understood it, but I got the sense that so my feelings are okay.
Yeah.
And they, like, you get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that you were, I felt heard, like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then the space between us is safe. You could come to me with your problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, I'm curious. I want to talk more with you.
Okay. So this is, as you were saying earlier, that parents think they are listening when they're not listening. So when parents are criticizing what the children are doing, and when parents are giving advice, they're not listening. Listening means that you actually hear what the children are saying and kind of validate where they are, and just having the conversation, because really most of what we want to preach to our children, they already know. We don't need to repeat it again, but we just need to let them know that the space between us is safe. They can come to us with any problem, because really, truly, there is no one else in the whole world that's going to love them as much as we do. But if they don't come to us, we have lost this opportunity.
The other thing is that, when you said there's no one who will love our children as much as we do, that sometimes, unfortunately, if parents are being critical, children actually don't feel loved. Even though that criticism is coming from a place of wanting to protect the child, and it's coming from love, but the child doesn't feel loved. And that's, the sad part. because as a child, you can't really understand all the fears that come up for parents, and why are they being so strict, and how come it seems like they can't understand, and the parents may be able to understand, but they kind of respond from that place of fear.
Yes.
And wanting to correct the behavior.
Yes.
And so the love gets kind of lost. The feeling of love, the experience of love gets lost.
Absolutely. And it's really sad. And perception is everything, they say in psychology. Mm-hmm. So if the child perceives that the parents don't love me, even though they love him or her, then we have lost that connecting piece.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think the role play is really helpful to give people some concrete ideas of how this would look like and sound like. I think we have time to do one last one, which is, you call it in the book, mistakes as opportunities to learn.
Yes.
And, I think about a lot of people whose goal is that their child should not make mistakes in the first place. So they want to prevent any mistakes from happening. So why or how would you have this idea that mistakes are an opportunity, and how would that change the way we parent?
So maybe I'm gonna begin processing this by actually maybe asking a series of questions to everyone who's attending, and no one needs to answer, but just I'm kind of like priming, or I'm sensitizing you to the idea of mistakes. So number one is, what were the messages about mistake in one's family as a child? Because there are three main messages about mistakes, and they relate actually to the parenting style directly. So one message is, you're not allowed to make mistakes, because if you make mistakes, that means you're a failure, you're worthless, you're not good enough. So that's one. The other message is, you can make mistakes as many as you want, other people are gonna fix it for you. You don't have to worry about being responsible and accountable and fixing your mistakes. The third message, and this is the message with positive discipline, is that mistakes are part of life, because, and in our Islamic tradition, no one is perfect. Allah is the only one who is perfect. So, so mistakes are part of life. And instead of using mistakes as opportunities to put down children, or to let them learn that they're not responsible, we're going to use that as teaching moments so that children learn to be responsible and accountable, which ultimately will mean that they're going to be much more productive as adults. So this is where we're coming from. So the messages that one received as a child is very important for the parent, because that could be driving what the parent is doing with their own children right now. And it could propagate a dysfunctional cycle. So one being aware is very important. Another question is, remember or think about something that you actually learned from a mistake that you have made. What did you learn? What was the life lesson that you learned from him? And I'm going to share with you my own one mistake I made when I was actually older. Okay, so it happened like only 15 years ago. And because as we go through life, we're always going to make mistakes. So I was rushing because I needed to go to a workshop that I was given, and I personally don't like to be late. I like to be on time. I think it's very important for me. So I was rushing. I was going to be late, and I'm backing out from the garage, and I'm not looking behind me, and I actually hit my son's car because it was in the driveway. He usually doesn't have it in the driveway. Okay, usually it's at the curb. So I'm like, so this was my my big mistake. It's like, and so I'm gonna tie it to another one. So owning responsibility would be that me as a parent understand that this was my mistake. I'm the one who didn't look as I was backing out, and so it was my mistake, my problem. Someone who doesn't own responsibility for the mistake would go like to her son and say something like, how dare you leave the car in the driveway? You know you're not supposed to leave it. Look what you have done. What have you done right now? I hit your car because you actually put it there. You were not supposed to. So, but what did I learn from this? Definitely look back. Some backing out. But I also learned that I really need to wake up earlier when I have a workshop. So I am actually calmer, and I'm not rushing like crazy. So if we look at mistakes in terms of like, what have you learned? It changes how our children actually deal with mistakes. And I'm gonna tie another one to it, because what happens with a lot of my parents who come to my office is they come to me and say, my child lies to me and nothing is working. He keeps lying. And when we work around the lying, typically lying is happening because the child is trying to protect himself or herself from the wrath or the scolding or the punishment of the parent. And that is usually revolving around something that the child has done that the parents do not agree with. So it's all tied together. If we have taught the children early on, mistakes are okay as long as you take responsibility for it, as you fix it, the child fixes it. And then it's okay. And as long as we know what we're learning from it. So if we establish this early on, the child are not going to be living in fear. They're not going to be living in fear of us and telling us what's going on. And lying will go down tremendously. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned lying, because that's actually a very common childhood behavior problem, which is also normal, right? Just developmentally at some stages. But I love the idea that when we are modeling the right behavior, including owning, it would be so easy, of course, to go in there and yell at your son for parking behind you. It'd be so easy. But I just love this idea that we're creating an environment that not only makes children feel more loved and helps them to take more responsibility, but also makes them feel safer.
Yes.
So that they know it's okay to make mistakes, and they experience some of the rahmah, the mercy that Allah extends to us. I mean, He tells us He knows we're going to make mistakes. He created us to make mistakes, and He asks us to turn back, and He tells us what to do, to correct our mistakes, right? So it's like creating that model in our home, and then holding ourselves to that as well. So even the parents can make mistakes.
Yes.
And we can model then what we do when we make a mistake. And so it kind of normalizes the making of mistakes, but it also teaches children what to do if they do make a mistake. And of course, we have to be forgiving when there are mistakes of ourselves too, because I think parents are often really hard on themselves because we also feel like we shouldn't be making mistakes.
Yes.
But as you said, we keep making them even when we're older. Like we're never done with this learning process, are we?
Never. And yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want me to share another story about mistakes from the book?
Well, we have some questions coming in, and I want to make sure that we get to them.
Okay.
But I have one question before I go to the questions that are coming in, because it's a common one that I often get, and I don't want to lose this opportunity to ask you. Many of us, many people who are listening may have experienced that authoritarian parenting style, where the discipline may have included hitting and name calling. And, many people will say, but, I turned out fine. Look, I turned out to be a responsible adult. I have maybe, I'm educated, I'm professional, I'm responsible, I'm volunteer in the community. So what is the problem exactly with, using that authoritarian and maybe incorporating the physical discipline? Why is that a problem?
Oh, so I'm going to begin by if a parent is saying, I was used, this is how I was parented and I turned out fine, I'm going to say to this parent, okay, so know that you have been blessed, that you have turned out fine, okay? Even though I have my biases as a therapist, okay, which means like if I were to dig with you, most probably you actually have wounds that are actually in fact impacting your life right now, and you're not really connecting it to all these childhood messages that you had as a young child when you, so, but if the parent's telling me they're turned out fine, I'm just gonna accept it. I'm gonna say, okay, know that you have been blessed, but know that it is not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee that just because you turned out fine, that your child is going to also be turning out fine using the same parenting style, especially, and I'm gonna emphasize this, especially because the culture has changed. So maybe when you were a child, it was actually, quote unquote, I'm putting in quotation, normal that you would be spanked. Maybe in your culture, whatever it was, whether in the US or anywhere else in the world. And maybe so you didn't feel alone because you had other kids who were maybe experiencing the same way of parenting. But nowadays, that's not the situation. Nowadays, a child who is raised in an authoritarian, with extreme, with a lot of harsh and negative parenting strategies, will feel alone because the culture around him or her is not that. They have a different way now. They're going to go and see other families who are treating their friends in a much better way, in addition to the whole messages in the culture about physical punishment. It's not acceptable. So I really, especially nowadays, don't see that this is going to be effective. And I also even believe from even before that it caused a lot of wounds, but maybe, the parents are not, aware of it. The other thing is, wouldn't the parent want to do their best to their children? And if their answer is yes, then no, just really know that authoritarian parenting is not the best, especially when there is physical punishment involved and psychological punishment. There are families that use shaming as their way of actually disciplining their children, and that is as harmful as spanking, if not even more, because these emotional scars are invisible, but they are so deep and they impact the rest of the life for the child. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm sure that many people can connect with what you're saying, because even though we may be functioning very well in our communities, we may be struggling with anxiety and even depression and, self-doubt, low self-esteem, those kind of things that really can be a direct result of being raised in a very critical and harsh manner, but we may not actually have made that connection.
Yes.
And so offering our children the opportunity to, have sort of more resilience, to be more confident, to be stronger, and have better coping skills, because life isn't our world is not getting any easier. So our children need to be very resilient and have a lot of positive coping skills. So it's really an opportunity, as you said, to do better, better, even if we came out fine. But most parents want our children to be even better.
Yes.
And to have better opportunities than we did.
And I'm going to also add one more piece here. So we have parents who grew up in an authoritarian household, and then they go to the other extreme when they're raising their children as a reaction. So they go to the permissive side, which means like, oh, I'm going to just love my child, and I'm not going to punish. I'm just going to do a lot of rewards. But that extreme also is actually also harmful. Research have shown that permissive parenting is somehow correlated with more addictions. And parents don't get that. It's because the child never learned emotional resiliency. The child never learned that I can sit with feeling disappointed and irritated and angry while my parent is sitting next to me, hugging me without saying anything. But I learned that this will pass and I'm going to be okay. That if it's not learned in childhood, the young adults will struggle. So that is the result of permissive parenting, because we actually we don't allow them to develop their emotional resiliency muscles. So I just want to be very careful with that, because I'm seeing this. I am seeing the reaction to authoritarian parenting with parents going to the permissive side.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. And I want to share a comment that one of our viewers made, that everything that you're talking about today applies to grandparents as well, grandparenting, not just the parents. And by extension, that means, you know, any of us who are interacting with any children, our nieces, our nephews, little cousins, we can practice these tools, even if the actual parents are not on board. But any of us, as we encounter children in the community, even we can use these tools.
That's very true. So one of the common questions I usually get is that the parents are on board in terms of they are doing positive discipline, but the grandparents are not. And then they ask me, so what do we do? And then I ask sometimes the parents are the primary caregivers are the grandparents.
Yeah. So this is actually a question that we got here. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to make sure we cover it the way that it's asked, because you led right into it. How do you advise parenting when other family lives with you in the household who may be advising the child on with a different parenting approach? So it's exactly where you're going.
Yeah. I always ask my my clients to focus on their area of control, because a lot of effort is actually lost in terms of like, oh, they need to change. They need to do this way. And we're not going to be able to change people around us. Even our spouses, we can change. We cannot change our children even. So we have to focus on what are we going to do, so then we can be more effective. So in a situation where there is a joint household situation, and we have, for example, the grandparents who are parenting in a either permissive or authoritarian, and the parents don't like that. So I always ask, so where is your limits of control? What can you do? Can you minimize the interactions between the grandparents and the children? If you work and your parents or your husband's parents are taking care of the children, you can't really change the grandparents. You can have a conversation. You can sit with them and tell them and talk to them and say, please, this is what we want to do. But if they decide to do their way, you have no control over that. So maybe at that time you need to consider other options. It could be that you put your children in, under the care of someone else. And I'm trying to be real, okay? But if you are in a situation where you don't have the option that the grandparents have to take care of the child, and you don't like their style, but there's nothing you can do beyond sitting and talking to them, that's all you can do. But don't sit and fume, because you're not helping yourself. I mean, if you cannot change the situation, then accept it and try to mitigate the influence or the impact of that parenting style that you don't like in your interaction with your children, even to the point of saying something like, okay, I personally don't approve of this. Be very clear with your children. It's okay. It's not disrespectful. Because to me, it's much more important that our children are not growing up in this, what to call it, like in order to protect elders or even spouses, our children sometimes are living in confusion because they're seeing two different things in front of them, and no adult in their life is telling them, yes, you're seeing this and you're seeing this, and I personally don't approve of this. They need that from us, because otherwise they're going to come up with their own theories about why these two things, different things, are happening. And some of their theories could be completely wrong.
And that's I'm sorry to talk over you. I thought you were finished. It's an important life lesson, because as our children grow up and meet other Muslims in the world and other people of other faiths, they see that there are so many different ways in the world. And they can learn sort of how do we live with different ways, different approaches. And so that's another thing that we model. We can express our agreement or disagreement in a respectful way.
Yes.
Right. And even explaining, we can even explain that, you know, your grandparents are from, you know, another culture. This is what's done in that culture. They love you very much.
Mhm.
You know, your mom and dad have chosen a different way of parenting, but we're going to respect. You know, so there's a lot that can be done there.
Yeah.
You know, there's a question that you touched on a little bit as you answered, but if you can unpack it a little bit more, that if the two parents, mother and father, have different ways of, different philosophies in parenting, so how could they navigate that?
We had a panel discussion just last week about parenting teens. And so there were 3 panelists, right? 2 of them experienced that in their own household, the husband and wife were not on the same page. So they struggled with that. They had to figure out, you know, how to kind of deal with it. Ultimately, it comes back to what I was emphasizing, is like, you need to really focus on your area of control. But just sitting and fuming about someone else that they're not changing is not going to help anyone in the family. So ultimately, in these 2 families, these 2 panelists, what happened after a lot of struggle is that they've come to recognize that ultimately who is the primary caregiver in the family. Okay, so that primary caregiver is the one who's going to do it their way, because they're the one with the children most of the time. Okay, that's the reality of the situation. The other spouse can share ideas, and but that spouse cannot force on the primary caregiver how to do things. And this sometimes in our community happens between, like, the husband has the ideal way of parenting. He wants his wife to follow, and the wife is the one who's doing the parenting. And he comes from, no, you have to do it this way because you're wrong. So respecting how the primary caregiver is doing it. But then I also said during that panel discussion that whoever is taking care of the children, it behooves you to go and make sure that you're doing it the right way. So it behooves you to go and read. It behooves you to go and take classes. So just because a specific style feels comfortable for you may not necessarily mean that it is the best way. So if that's your primary responsibility, do your and go and actually learn about how to do it. But accept the fact that you're not gonna agree. Like one of the panelists said, that we have come to recognize at the end that we need to agree that we are going to disagree. And we're gonna be respectful, and we're not gonna be forceful, but we're gonna continue to share ideas, but the primary caregiver is the one who is going to do it.
Wonderful, thank you. We have another question. If you have 2 children close in age, and one is more behaviorally challenging than the other, how does discipline of the more challenging kid affect the other kid?
Okay. So I'm just trying to think about what's the best way to answer this question. And also that means maybe understanding where the question is coming from. So I'm just assuming maybe the question is asking, so if we're punishing one of the children because this child is misbehaving, what's going to be, I'm making assumptions here, but anyway, I'm going to say, and this is very general, if we're using positive discipline, if we're using the tools of positive discipline, then children actually will not feel that one is better than the other. They will all be on equal terms, even if one is more challenging than the other. But the whole principle, the whole framework of positive discipline is not about labeling. It's not about seeing one child that is more challenging, and so it comes off in terms of how we speak, and comes off in how we actually interact with the child. That doesn't happen in positive discipline. We see these behavior challenges as the ineffective ways that the child is using to deal with life. And our job is to really help the child, to guide the child in how to deal with life, and how to use, again, these challenging behaviors as ways to empower the child so they will actually gain that emotional resiliency. I know I answered the question in a very, very general way, but without, giving a specific example, it's very hard for me to respond.
Well, I was imagining that, the child who may be misbehaving more, that requires the parent to be listening more, doing more problem solving, giving different choices, depending on the age of the child, talking, maybe natural consequences or logical consequences, but it's all positive. It's all a positive response.
Yes.
And so what happens often in more traditional or authoritarian homes, the child who's more challenging will be sent to timeout more, is going to be spanked more, is going to be yelled at more, which could really have a negative effect on the relationship between the siblings, and some children become the bad child in the family versus the good child. Whereas if I'm the way I'm understanding this positive parenting is we all make mistakes and we're all going to learn from these mistakes, and there are so many tools of how we help our children address those mistakes, correct the behavior. If they broke the vase, okay, they have to help clean it up if they're old enough to do that, or whatever it is, but maybe they have to buy another one, something, but that it's really a more positive environment to start with. And so if we look at it in fragments, it's hard maybe to see how you would apply it in your home. But if you have the whole philosophy,
yes,
it's a different environment altogether.
Absolutely. And with that kind of environment, the way you described it beautifully, mashallah, the child who is perfect, quote unquote, is not gonna feel superior to his sibling or her sibling, because that's not the framework of positive discipline. It's not like they will be sent the message, oh, you're not getting in trouble as much as your sibling, that's why you are perfect. That's another problem, by the way, because children who grow up to think of themselves as perfect, they have their own sets of challenges, and it comes back and haunts them, even if it can happen earlier, but so yes.
Okay, great, thanks. We have some more questions. What is your best advice for parents who grew up with two opposite parenting approaches? So one parent grew up with permissive and one parent grew up with authoritative, and they are constantly playing good cop, bad cop with their own children. And parenting is basically their greatest point of contention in the marriage. Mom, who needs to play bad cop most of the time because dad has a very permissive style, has listened and read a lot on parenting and tried to convince dad, but dad is resistant.
So we kind of touched on that when we talked about the differences in styles between husband and wife, but I get this statement about good cop and bad cop a lot, and it's a very common statement in the US that parents believe that this is how we're gonna do kindness and firmness at the same time. Like one will be firm and the other one will be kind. One parent will be firm and the other will be kind. And this is a myth about positive discipline, because positive discipline is about the parent, one parent, being kind and firm at the same time. So if the mother is feeling that she is being bad cop in order to be firm and establish boundaries in the household, that means the mother is not applying positive discipline. I don't know what she's applying, but you don't feel as a bad cop when you're applying positive discipline, because you're focusing on limits and you're not doing it in a harsh way where you're disconnecting from your children. And then the other piece that we also talked about earlier is stop wasting your time on changing your spouse. The best thing you can do if your spouse is really not on board with you is just to really model effective parenting with your children. So your spouse goes and wow, my children actually go to him or to her. They actually like to talk to him or to her. Something is going on, and maybe it's going to take years before it actually clicks. But for the parent who's doing positive discipline, authoritative parenting, keep on doing what is right. And don't worry about convincing your husband. If it comes there's a challenge and they need to discuss it, state your opinion. Say, this is, what I think we need to do. And then whoever is going to take care of that particular challenge gets to do it his or her way. And children are going to be okay overall, because they actually the children are very smart. I'm telling you, I have a grandson who's already 3 years old. Okay, he's 3. Okay, he knows already the differences of the styles of the adults around him. He already knows it. Nobody taught him. Nobody told him anything. He knows that me, grandma, teta, she is okay with him being adventurous on the playground. I don't panic when he's climbing and, doing all this stuff. So, okay. So it really, kids are smart. So I really invite all parents, you should just focus on learning, studying, and then doing the right thing. And don't worry too much about the people that are around you who are doing the opposite.
Yeah, that's a really important point. More questions. Can you give us a couple of tools to use with toddlers and preschoolers in how to deal with defiant and aggressive behavior?
Okay. Number one with toddlers and preschoolers is that we need to have routines. There are many households nowadays where there are no routines. Routines are very important. Why? Because routines, they provide a safety. They provide a sense of predictability. And then they could minimize the need of the child to act out, because they know what to expect. They know how things play out. So the routines, very important. And who's the person who's gonna do the routine? Is the parent, not the toddler, not the preschool. You need to have that routine in your mind, very clear in your mind. It's even better if you can have it visually, so the child can actually follow through with you in terms of the routine. So this is one piece. The other piece with aggression, I heard you say the word aggression. So I'm thinking maybe they mean, for example, and that's a question that came to me one day. They had a mommy and me group, and it's like 2 and 3 years old, and there is one child who goes and who hits other children. And so my recommendation was the following. Immediately, you need to go and intervene when a child is hitting someone else, okay? And pull them by the hand and say, we don't hit other people. And then say, for example, hold his right hand and have the child rub, for example, the back of the other boy or other girl and say, this is how we deal with people, gently. So it's not enough to say we don't hit. It's also important to model, okay, what do we do? How do we interact, or how do we behave? So this is one piece. The other piece is, I said to to whoever was asking me the question, we need to do tracking. Tracking means we need to start catching, why is the hitting happening? When is it happening? So we understand what's going on with the child, because the hitting is not coming out of nowhere. It's coming because this child is trying to express something, doesn't know how to express it, so he's expressing it in terms of hitting. So is it happening, for example, because they're playing and then the other child took his toy and he didn't know what to do, so he hit him? We need to just observe, track, so we can make connections to the child. So we can start saying, this is where we need to train the child in emotional validation and expressions. So we can say, okay, you are upset because Ahmed took the toy from you. Okay, you need to say, Ahmed, I'm still playing with the toy, for example. With my own 2 grandsons, I have one that's 3, one that's 2. So they do parallel play at this stage. They don't do like together. So what do? Is they're playing together in the same room. One of them goes and takes the toy from the other child. So what we have started doing is we go, and because we're observing, we're seeing. So we say, okay, Adham, you have the toy. We're gonna set the timer for 1 minute. when the timer goes off, you're going to give it to Zakaria. So we actually did this, and they have started actually respecting the timer when it goes off. Okay, and then they go and give it to the other child. So a lot of observation, a lot of supervision, and a lot of training with toddlers and preschoolers.
Yeah, thanks. It's a challenging age, right? Because, but again, I think the understanding that what we call misbehavior is really their inability to express what they want. And so we're teaching them how to do that. We have one question that will be our last question for today. I'm sure there are many others, but we really appreciate having you know how to answer these questions today. The last question is, after reading the book, I have found most strategies very helpful. My issue is implementing them. So many times I've acted on impulse and then thought in retrospect I should have handled it with a different strategy, but I often forget. What are some ways to best remember the strategies?
Okay, very good question.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very appreciative that the person who's asking the question is being very honest and candid and saying I act on impulse, and that's the key word. So when I hear I am acting on impulse, that to me means that there needs to be some work on oneself in terms of understanding what are the triggers for the impulse. And so just briefly to kind of like, so it means that when a person has reached the stage of impulse, there has been other things happening before and we haven't caught it before. So we need to recognize what are we triggered by, how do we think about it, because those are the ones that takes us to impulse. And so that means a lot of journaling, basically. So I'm going to invite this parent to do some journaling in terms of when am I losing my cool? When am I losing my patience? What are the triggers? What are the circumstances surrounding that? And track it for a week and see if you actually are seeing any patterns. For example, I have mothers, for example, that at the end of the day, they're very tired. Khalas, their emotional reservoir is really depleted. So a small thing could just come up and then, just ruin the whole thing for them. So what are you going to do about yourself if you're tired at the end of the day? So it's more focusing on finding solutions to how you react to the triggers so that you can actually implement the tools. Because definitely when we have flipped our lid, we are no longer in a state where we can implement any of the knowledge that we have learned. We're in a state where we're acting on impulse, being irrational, we're just allowing our emotions to rule. And it's a very tough state. And it's a tough state for parents because we're overwhelmed with so many different things. So my invitation is tracking, understanding the different contexts and circumstances around when I go into impulse, and then going back and saying, okay, what can I change? What can I change in the system? What can I change in how I'm doing my day? Do I need more help?
I'm really appreciating this question and the way you've answered it, because I think really one of the most difficult aspects of parenting is managing ourselves, because we're juggling so much. I mean, we have our own lives, all the work, the physical work that is going into being a parent, the things we're juggling, the ways in which our children's behavior may push our own buttons. And so it's to me, the biggest growth opportunity for us as adults, by the time we go through this parenting journey, we have to learn so much about ourselves and how to take care of ourselves, and even to appreciate, what we're doing right, because we might have a day where we got to 7 p.m. and we did really well, and then we lost it at 7:30 because we're tired or hungry or whatever. But not to lose sight of what we did well up until, 7 p.m. So a lot of self-compassion. You mentioned when we flip our lid, and so I just wanted to refer people, since we don't really have time to go into that, but Daniel Siegel, if you go on YouTube or just Google, flipping the lid, or this is basically when we are triggered, and so we're not operating with our whole brain, but there's a lot of really good information about that out there. And I'm not able to remember Dan Siegel's most recent book. I think it's the Whole Brain Child. The Whole Brain Child.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of great resources out there that can be helpful to us. So we're going to wrap up for today. And again, Noha, we're really appreciative of having you on the program. We're looking forward to, in our prevention efforts, to go younger and younger in cultivating homes that really have healthy and positive, nurturing environments, so that we raise human beings that will have healthy adult marriages and relationships, inshallah. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all the people who joined us today. And we're looking forward to seeing you in our future programs, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair. Ma as-salama.
Ma as-salam.